All right, 2 out of 3, y'all. We're almost wrapped up here in this afternoon session. I did want to go ahead and introduce our third and final speaker of the Aquifer track. This is going to be Mr. Philip Webster, and he's currently a hydrologist with R.W. Harden and Associates. He's also a professional geoscientist licensed in the state of Texas. Woo, twins. Philip has been using his numerical and analytical groundwater flow models to evaluate groundwater availability, sustainability, and well field planning. During his career, he has performed tasks that include acquisition and analysis of hydrologic and hydrogeologic data, utilization of TWDB adopted groundwater availability models to study impacts of regional production and drought, and generating technical memorandums and reports summarizing findings of groundwater studies. Philip received a Bachelor of Science in Hydrogeology from Tarleton State University, me too, and a Master's of Science in Geology from the University of Texas at San Antonio. Let's go ahead and give Philip a big round of applause.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Philip Webster, and I'm a hydrogeologist at R.W. Harden and Associates. Today, I'll be presenting on the newly developed Clearwater groundwater management model. The Clearwater model is a submodel of Bell County based on the Northern Trinity Woodbine GAM. I would like to acknowledge that this model development was a collaborated effort with Mike Keister and I and James Beach and Yihong Shin at Advanced Groundwater Solutions. I would also like to thank Clearwater for funding this project and for making scientific projects a priority of the district, making models like these possible. So why develop a management model? So the first obvious thing is going from a large regional model to a county level model really reduces the runtime. So right now, the Northern Trinity Woodbine GAM takes about 3.5 hours to 4 hours to run, and that's for a single simulation. So if you're running multiple simulations or you're running additional modeling programs, you can extend that time quite a bit. It's one of those things where you start at the end of the day, and hopefully when you come in the office the next morning, everything's done and done correctly, which it never is. So a big headache. So the Clearwater model currently has about a 10-minute runtime. So it's a huge improvement and reduces all those headaches. Another thing is for permit evaluations. So this supplies Clearwater District as just an additional tool for evaluating more regional drawdown during their permit evaluations. So we also took a scripting-based approach when converting the data into the ModFlow input files. And this just kind of makes things way more efficient in the future as studies over the stratigraphy or structures or faults are conducted. We can easily update the model input files and recalibrate and have them another model. We also incorporated uncertainty during the calibration process, and this allows us to incorporate uncertainty into the projection scenarios as well. And since the model was updated, the model code was updated to ModFlow 6, we were able to connect this to other ModFlow 6 models for more regional modeling or for allowing it to be used for assistance in the joint planning process. And here's a figure on the right here. This is the Trinity Woodbine. This is the simulated head values versus the observed head values. And as you can kind of see, we actually have Bell counties and the gray data points. And as you can see, all the values are on the left-hand side of that one-to-one line, indicating that the model results were over-simulated. So this is, we'll re-see this same figure, but for the Clearwater model later. So just wanted to give reference to that. So the submodel was extracted from the Northern Trinity Woodbine GAM and is focused around Bell County. The submodel grid maintained the same layering and the same cell size, so it's 1/4 mile by 1/4 mile. The purple line here beyond Bell County is the perimeter of the active model area, which is a 10-mile buffer around Bell County. The structure within Bell County was updated to reflect the hydrostratigraphic model Alan Standen and Michelle Sutherland developed. And so within the active area beyond Bell County, we interpolated that 3D model with the current Trinity Woodbine GAM. And again, we developed scripts in this process so that we could automate the conversion of those 3D model files, or 3D stratigraphic model files, to the ModFlow input files, so that when that model gets updated, we can easily update it in the model. And for the perimeter, we use the general head boundary condition cells, and I'll get more on that in a little bit. But that just helps control the flow in and out of the model. And originally the Trinity Woodbine was calibrated through 2012, and so we went ahead and extended that through 2020. And we wanted to focus more on the Middle Trinity and the Lower Trinity aquifer. So we updated those parameters mostly from pumping test, looking at the transmissivity and the storativity. And also included in the calibration is the fault conductances. We included vertical hydraulic conductivity and the conductance on the general head boundary to allow for less or more flow into the model. Okay, so the first one of these parameters is the pumping test. So to get the transmissivity values, we looked at pumping tests from the Middle and Lower Trinity aquifers. The historical pumping test data came from mostly the Texas Water Development Board Groundwater database, but more recent tests came from the permitting process of non-exempt wells with Clearwater, or they came from studies conducted by Dr. Yelderman with his students at Baylor University alongside the Clearwater staff. So I can see on the figure on the left of the Middle Trinity, we don't have a lot of data, but we do have data on the western side. And we mostly see values under about 3,000 gallons per day per foot. And we also actually have some data points that were less than 100 gallons per day per foot, which is extremely low. But 3 of these tests in the central area, these 3 right here, were all conducted by Dr. Yilderman and his students and had documentation and reporting. So we did feel comfortable including all this data because that kind of validated the ranges that we were seeing. On the right here, we have the Lower Trinity. As you can see, we have a much better spatial resolution of data. And again, in these more up-dip on the western side of the district, we see values less than 100. So that's just where the aquifer is really thinning out and pinching out. So the transmissivity values are really low. But as you do move down dip and east of the county, you do see values increase all the way up to 50, 65,000 gallons per day per foot. So much higher values. So we use the hydraulic flow barrier cells to represent the decrease in flow across the faults. The faults in the western and southwestern region of the county were based on a study that Standen did, delineating these faults using lithology descriptions from state well reports. So these are represented as black lines on the map, and they're kind of hard to see because they have the HFB cells underneath them, but on the Trinity Woodbine, you'll see in the western portion of the county, you see all those black lines. Those are basically were delineated during the study. And so we included all those, and then to get all the faults outside of that study zone, we took what was already conducted in the Trinity Woodbine so that we could include as much as we could. And I will note that with this structure, there were a lot of offsets of the model layers, and that is something that was not included in the previous regional model. A lot of the stratigraphy was really smoothed out, so you miss those opportunities where the fault's offsetting and where the water levels would therefore also be offset. And we've run some simulations, and I don't have them here, but we were able to see those water levels being offset, so it was kind of nice to see that. So the pumping data is usually pretty difficult to estimate. So we only stuck with what we could estimate with some confidence, so we stuck to 2011 to 2020. And we mostly took the non-exempt usage from the district with their permits reporting, and we used the exempt usage estimates that Clearwater also has. So on these charts, you can see the blue bars are the Texas Water Development Board's water use survey data, and we have the non-exempt use from Clearwater as the orange bars, and as the gray bars, that is what was included in the model. And so this is both for the Edwards and the Trinity, and they follow a pretty similar pattern of from 2011 to 2015, you see this kind of decrease during the drought, and then beyond that to 2020, we see this slow increase with development. So for the perimeter, as I said, we use the general head boundary condition. So this took a lot of data to develop because essentially what we needed to do was define a water level for every single one of these cells on the perimeter for each year. So we looked at 1980 to 2020, and we basically looked at the Texas Water Development Board and combined that data set with the Clearwater data set, and we're able to, per year, create an interpolated surface of water levels that we then assigned to that cell. Okay. All right, so then the calibration. So we, So the calibration was based on history matching using water level data or targets. Most of the data was from the Clearwater monitoring network, but we did supplement some data from the Texas Water Development Board. Since the model had a 1-year stress period, we looked at data mostly from December, but not every well had data from December for that year. So what we would do is we would then look at November and January, and we would move 3 months on either side, but making the priority as close to December as possible. And we focused on multiple water level related targets to inform the calibration, the parameter calibration. This included the actual water level measurement, the annual change, the absolute value of the annual change, the overall trend, and the trend between turning points, which I'm going to work through each one of those on the next slides here. So here's an example of a middle Trinity well that we use as one of our calibration targets. You can see this is a pretty common trend that we see in the middle Trinity and lower Trinity, where we have this, as an overall trend, you see this kind of a drawdown over time. And so again, the first water level related target that we looked at was just comparing the simulated value against the observed value. The next one was the year over year change. So this is just how much drawdown did you have in 1 year. And as you can see here, it's mostly between 0 and 10 feet of drawdown every single year. And there's a couple data points that indicate it was about 15 or 20. So this just helps the model figure out what direction the water levels are moving in. Is it positive? Is it negative? Right? Is there the drawdown, or is there some recovery? The next is the same as before, but the absolute value of that. And this just kind of helps with the magnitude of what direction it's moving in. And we use the overall trend. So this is just looking at all the data from that target well and putting a linear line to it. And you can see here that, it has as a historical for all of the data in the well, it has a pretty good trend in one direction. But to acknowledge that there's some deviations occurring in between those trends, we did a turning point analysis, and basically these turning points are just identifying the data point where there's a slope change. And so we used an algorithm to identify these turning points, and then we calculated the slope in between those points. And this was just kind of our mid-ranged trend analysis for it. Okay, so back to the calibration. As far as the approach, we used pilot points for the hydraulic conductivity and the storage, and we allowed conductance of each one of the faults to vary. We also applied just a model-wide multiplier for the vertical hydraulic conductivity, and we allowed the conductance of those GHBs to vary as well to help reduce the amount of water coming in or increase the amount of water coming in. And we did take an ensemble model approach during the calibration. And this basically essentially means that we allowed multiple models that fit instead of just a single model. And this helps us give us the uncertainty for the predictive runs as we'll have multiple models to run and we can look at the variation across those models. So the following couple of slides show the results of the base model of the ensemble of results. And the base model is the realization or the model with the starting values and is often considered the mean of the realizations. So here are the results of the modeled transmissivity. We used a log-log scale here just because we did see a wide range of values less than 100 to values all the way up to 100,000. So we use a log-log scale, but in general, we saw a pretty good fit between this modeled and simulated. And this just indicates that looking at all those pumping test data, looking at the transmissivities we got from those, the model is pretty close to what we saw in those actual data. So here are the results of the base model comparing the observed and the simulated heads. Again, that dotted line is the one-to-one line where anything above that indicates that the simulated values were greater than the actual measured or observed values. So overall, you can see a pretty good trend of overall the values were over that dotted line, and so the model simulated too much water. The water levels were higher. So looking at each individual aquifer, we have the Edwards aquifer here in the blue data points. And overall, you can actually see a pretty good spread across that black line, which is what we want. But looking at more of the Trinity water levels, you can see how they're pretty much all over simulated. But the lower Trinity is in the red there, and you can see for those higher water levels, which are on the western part of the district, the higher elevation water levels, it generally follow that same pattern that we just talked about where they're over simulated. But as we did move down dip, we did see a little bit better correlation with the observed water levels. So we ran a bunch of statistics, but we only wanted to include one so you don't have a bunch of numbers to look at. And what we show on here is the root mean square error. And that first values from the Trinity Woodbine, and that second value is from the Clearwater model. So you can see on the overall root mean square error decreased quite a bit, but even just looking at the middle Trinity or just looking at the lower Trinity, it also decreased. So here are some hydrographs of each one of the management zones of the Clearwater district, the middle Trinity, or the Hensel. And the figure shows the target wells that were used during the calibration. Those are those blue dots there. And on each one of the figures, you see that green line, which is the results from the Trinity Woodbine, and you see the blue line, which is from the Clearwater model results. And the orange dots, the orange data points are from the target data that we used. And one thing to note is with the Trinity Woodbine, as you can see, especially on these graphs on the left here, that there wasn't really much drawdown occurring, and they're pretty much constant if anything. But in the Clearwater model, we were able to show some more drawdown. There's still definitely improvement, as you can see, whereas the drawdown in some of these wells is much greater than what the model simulated. Another thing to note is that the realizations of the results are plotted on the hydrographs, so the variation of the results are included, but at this scale that we're showing here, they're really difficult to see, and that may just be due to not enough, we didn't allow the parameters to vary enough, or we were modeling such a small area where we weren't able to see that spatial variability. But if we zoomed in on some of these graphs, we would be able to see kind of a spread around that main blue line. And here are the lower Trinity, or the Hostin graphs, hydrographs. And, pretty similar story as the middle Trinity. In the Trinity Woodbine, we don't see that much drawdown. We see pretty constant values, where we were able to get a little bit better drawdown in the Clearwater model results here. But again, just to reiterate, there still is some improvement, because you can look at the target data, you can see there's a little bit more drawdown occurring than the model was simulating. So since we developed this submodel and we were able to more closely align those drawdowns with the target data, one of the questions that we had was, given the current modeled available groundwater that's used in the Trinity Woodbine, what would the new DFC be? And so this was the first predictive run that we did. And, as you can probably guess, the average amount of drawdown did increase. But again, that makes sense looking at the hydrographs from the Trinity Woodbine and the Clearwater model. But we did show an actual increase in water levels with that pumping in the Glenrose, but we did mostly focus all of our data on the middle Trinity and the lower Trinity. And the second predictive simulation we ran was looking at the opposite, was looking at what the modeled available groundwater would be given that current desired future condition, which is just the average amount of drawdown occurring in the county by aquifer. So for this one, we utilized PEST to find this modeled available groundwater given the DFC, and basically we just started out with an initial guess, and then we let PEST increase or decrease the pumping for that aquifer over different simulations and allow it to approach what that DFC is. And again, just like the last one, we saw a decrease in the middle Trinity and the lower Trinity, which again makes sense with the results that we saw. So overall, we were able to develop a submodel based on the northern Trinity Woodbine GAM around Bell County in the Clearwater district. This gives Clearwater a more efficient and representative model to aid with permit evaluations and assist in joint planning. And again, I would like to thank our collaborators with Advanced Groundwater Solutions and the Clearwater for funding this project. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks for the talk. Looking at that scatter plot, the first thought that comes to mind is that the water budgets are likely off. You have too much water in the system.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions. What were the storage numbers in your model? And the second is, how did you get the initial conditions in the model?
Yeah, so I'd have to go back and look at the actual storage values. I don't have a parameter map in front of me, but we did use storage values, or storativity values from the pumping test that we used, the same for transmissivity. And I'm sorry, what was the second part? Second question.
How did you generate the initial conditions for the model, initial heads?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the Trinity Woodbine, its initial conditions are considered the pre-development water levels. Please correct me if I'm wrong on this. And so we actually used those same initial conditions and interpolated that between, I think, 1960 or 1980s when we actually started putting in our water levels. So we just used an interpolated value in between for those. So, but it was supposed to be a pre-development before pumping was occurring as the initial conditions. And that was, I think, 1890 is what that model uses. So.
Well, we don't see any other questions, so let's go ahead and give Philip a hand. Thank you so much.